Good morning, everyone. My name is Cassius Jones. I'm coming at you live from San Francisco. It's a beautiful Thursday morning here in the city by the bay. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Really excited to chat with you all about some of the best parking strategies that we've seen enacted in the municipal environment here in 2020. We're also going to run through some of the latest trends that we're seeing in the industry. My hope is that after seeing today's webinar, you're going to walk away with some informed strategies that you might be able to introduce in your municipal parking environment in 2021. It's a little early here on the West Coast, so we're going to give folks another minute or two. We still got lots of folks joining, so I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, and we'll get things started in just a minute or two. Thanks for sitting tight, folks. Looking forward to it. All right, everyone. If you had just joined us in the last minute, I'll introduce myself once more. My name is Cassius Jones. I am the head of national accounts and customer success here at Smarking. I've had the privilege for working for Smarking for 5 years now. I'm excited to chat with you all today about some of the best municipal parking strategies that we've seen enacted here in 2020. We're also going to be reviewing some of the latest trends that we're seeing in the industry, and then look to basically marry those two things into some recommendations and parking management strategies for 2021. This webinar is brought to you by Smarking and our good friends over at Amano McGann. Thank you to Amano for helping make this webinar happen. All right, folks, I hope you're ready. We're going to dive right in. So just to quickly recap what I'm going to cover for you all today. First things first, I'm going to go ahead and show you all some of the most interesting live market trends around which parkers are coming back and potentially use that to prognosticate about what might happen in the coming months. I have the privilege of sitting over 2,500 locations. I take a look at a lot of interesting parking data. What I've tried to do for you folks today is just take some of the trends that I think are most interesting and most telling, distill those into a series of charts. I'm excited to walk you through those. Once we move on from the industry trends section, I'm going to be highlighting some of the best strategies that I've seen employed in the municipal parking environment here in 2020. These are strategies that help advance the city's transportation and mobility goals while also managing the fiscal impact that COVID has wrought on municipal budgets. I think that parking has a very, very special role to play in helping municipal environments get out of this COVID crisis. We see the transit numbers aren't necessarily where they need to be. Folks are basically more relying on their car. I think parking is going to play a leading role in helping cities get out of some of these budget holes while also advancing us towards a better, more sustainable, and more equitable transportation future. And so some of the strategies that I'm going to be highlighting, some of the work that they're doing down in Southern California, two of our good clients down in Santa Monica and Long Beach. Also very excited to highlight today some of the cool work that we're doing in Asheville, North Carolina. Beautiful little mountain town at the foot of the Great Smoky Mountains. in southeastern US. All the attendees are in listen-only mode today, and so if you would like to ask a question, I ask that you do so through the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. If time allows, I'll be reviewing the questions that have been submitted through the question box and looking to answer those for you folks at the end of the webinar. And with that, I figure we just dive in. Now for the next section, I'm probably going to walk through, I don't know how many it is, maybe 10 or 12 slides. Like I said, these are the sort of like 10, 12 slides that I think are sort of most interesting from a parking trends perspective. I've tried to think critically about this and only give you guys the good stuff. All of these slides are basically being distilled from Smarking's new industry benchmark tool. This is something that aggregates data across regions and asset types and allows folks with access to the industry benchmark tool in order to understand these trends by region, by asset type, and then compare your own assets against them to understand whether you're ahead, you're behind, and so on. And you can think about it almost as the S&P 500 of the parking industry. One special thing that we're doing this quarter is we're willing to offer folks the industry benchmark free of cost. Well, the basic deal is if you contribute your data to the benchmark, we'll give you access to the tool. And so over the next couple of slides, if you see this as something that might be compelling for you or your operation and you're willing to contribute your data to the benchmark in order to make it more rich and more robust, please get in touch. Only qualified systems, but we can talk about which data systems fit best into the benchmark in a follow-up conversation. So please, folks, just keep that in mind around our industry benchmark slides. Cool. Well, first things first, I just thought that we'd start with the North American parking industry year to date. So what this slide is showing us is year-over-year performance for North American parking assets, both surface lots and garages. This is in the Offstreet side of the house. We're taking a look at transient revenues and basically doing year-over-year performance by week from year to date. So what does this chart and story tell us? We were having a pretty good 2020, folks. You guys remember January and February? Those were the good old days, right? On average, we were seeing parking revenues grow from a transient perspective, 10, 15, 20%. Story starts to change here in early March, right? First week in March, not looking so hot. Really, this second week of March here is where things fell off of a cliff. This was the week of March 16th for me. This is a week that will go down in infamy. I was in the office on Monday, March 16th, thinking that I was going to be a tough guy. Smarking had implemented a voluntary work from home policy right around noon. London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, said I couldn't be a tough guy and sent us all home. Anyways, yeah, a very interesting moment in time for me. The industry really bottomed out here in April. So third week of April, I think parking revenues are down year over year on average across these 910 plus locations that are included in the benchmark by 95%. So this was sort of the depths of the crisis. What I think is interesting about this chart is really sort of slicing and dicing the recovery into two phases. So you can see here, basically from April to about mid-June, we went from being down 95% to being down about 75% in mid-June. This basically growth of 20% occurred over 10 weeks. So things sort of unfroze and essential workers maybe started to go back to work, and maybe people started making trips to the grocery store after stocking up on groceries during these couple of weeks. So this was the fastest pace of the recovery. We'll call this sort of like our phase one of the recovery. Since then, we've had about 20 weeks from mid-June, and we've really only recovered, right, another 20% over that period of time. So currently, based on the latest live data, the industry on average is down 54%. And so I think what's interesting about this is just that the first pace of the recovery has been one that it was pretty quick. And then it's sort of been a little bit of a long slog here, especially if you can take a look at what's happened over here by the fall, right? Almost no growth here, basically from late August into late October. So it's going to be interesting to see and track and measure whether we see an uptick in revenue recovery. But for now, right, our phase 2 growth seems to be a little bit more muted, a little bit more slow than some of the growth in revenue recovery that we saw from April to mid-June. I saw this chart the other day, and I spend a good amount of time looking at my North American off-street parking chart, and I said, that looks a little bit familiar. So this is from the good folks over at Edison Trends. What this chart shows us is the U.S. ride-hail spending year-to-date, basically week-over-week recovery. I knew that parking was correlated to transportation. I guess that what was interesting to me about this chart is oftentimes you think about Uber or Lyft as really competing with parking, but I think that this chart shows is that we're more in the same boat than not. Very, very similar to the recovery in North American parking revenues. It seems like the ride-hail industry is going through a very similar recovery trend, right? Here from the bottom of April all the way through mid-June, it looks like we had some pretty quick recovery. The pink line is Uber, or excuse me, the pink line is Lyft, the black line is Uber, right? And then you can see here, it's been a little bit more muted, right? In the last 2 months, it doesn't really look like spending on Lyft has grown much at all. The story at Uber is a little bit better. There's a slight uptrend there, but still down more than 50% year over year. This is in line with what our on average North American parking garage or surface lot is doing. And so just kind of interesting to me just how correlated ride-hail demand and parking demand are. But of course, things get a little bit more granular, right? And so I thought first things first, we would take a look at what's happening in the US on-street parking market. And so very similar chart, right? We're taking a look at year-over-year revenues by week. You'll remember, for those of you with a photographic memory, right, the on average garages and surface lots are down about 54% in October. Here in our on-street environment, we're down 39.8. So things in the off-street environment are about 15–16% stronger relative to our off-street parking. I think this reflects the different type of demand that on-street parking caters to. So you've got folks that are running in to pick up a pizza. We've got folks that are grabbing groceries or what have you. And then obviously, if you think about the type of demand that is typically serviced by off-street parking structures, right? Commuters and people going into work, business trips, obviously come to mind. And with shelter in place, a lot of that demand is not where it used to be. And so not surprising to me, and hopefully not surprising to you, that on-street is performing better than off-street by about 15 percentage points. Again, I sort of interesting though, even though we see stronger relative performance, we sort of have this two-phased recovery approach. Things are pretty strong from April through June, and then the slower recovery here through the second, basically the second half of the summer and into fall. But things vary significantly by region. So if we're isolating on-street parking revenues in Miami, Florida, this is a chart that looks pretty good, right? Things were bad in Miami just like where they were everywhere else, down 90%, but Miami seems to have been strong through the first phase of the recovery and then just kept going. Latest week, revenues on street in Miami, Florida, down 16.08%. I can't believe I ever would say down only 16. Cassius Jones in 2019, if a client was down 16%, I'd be sweating beads. But for the folks in Miami, I think they've got to be pretty happy to be only down 16% in this environment when the rest of the industry is down 40 or down 55. Really interesting to see the strength and the economic activity in Miami, Florida. City of Houston is a little bit behind the benchmark. taking a look here, very similar trend, right? But almost since that mid-June, I think we've had a couple of flare-ups in Houston. You can see the impact of sort of like a phase 2 of COVID flare-ups here in the summer. It's been a little bit more of a mixed bag in terms of the city of Houston's on-street parking revenue recovery, with the industry on average down 40%. The folks in Houston are sitting at about 52. We can see that Houston is a little bit behind the national average. So we're transitioning now out of on-street parking land and into off-street parking land. We've hopped on a flight 45 minutes south of the Bay Area, and we've found ourselves in the beautiful Los Angeles metropolitan region, where Smarking's off-street industry benchmark includes more than 80 locations. Here's how the average garage is doing in Los Angeles. You can see, right, very similar trend. Boom, things are down in April. One thing that's a little bit interesting to me is that the rest of the industry started to bounce off a little bit faster. Things in LA stayed locked down. Interestingly enough, right, we're sort of made steady progress here. And right, for this week here on October 12th, we see revenues from transient parking down 46% on average, compared with the national average of 54. A little bit ahead this week. These latest weeks are closer to 60. So I would say, on the whole, the Los Angeles metropolitan region from an off-street parking perspective is about in line with the national average. Here's the Boston metropolitan region. Boston, beautiful city. I understand they've got a nice fall weather this time of year. I hope folks are enjoying it. Here we're taking a look at Boston. Pretty locked down here. Again, that pretty quick recovery. Boston slightly ahead of national trends here, 52. They've had some stronger weeks, broadly in line. A little interesting here to see sort of what caused this relative strength these last 2 weeks. Going to be interesting to see how some of the third wave that we're currently experiencing impacts revenue trends in the Boston off-street garage market. I've only got 2 more of these slides for you, team. I thought we would just cruise through some of the most biggest metros. Here we're in Chicago, Illinois, the Windy City. Very similar with national trends. I do think the most interesting thing about the Chicago trend line is some of the relative strength that we were seeing sort of in the late summer, early fall here. So you can see here, there's a couple of weeks in Chicago where things are beating the national benchmark pretty significantly. I wonder to myself, maybe folks were just getting outside and enjoying the nice late summer weather before things got to be a little bit chilly. I understand that from my clients in Chicago that winters there can be not so pleasant all of the time. We also know that the middle of the country right now is suffering from the worst from a third wave. So it could be potentially they were doing very well from a caseload standpoint during this period of time, and then folks are getting a little bit more conservative. Again, I think given the rise in the headlines around the cases just that we're seeing now, I'm going to be really interested to check in on these charts in just a week or two to see how the latest hoopla and concern, very legitimate concern over the third wave of our national COVID crisis has impacted parking trends and revenues in the Windy City. I wanted to, I apologize, this is a mistake on my end, team. We are not looking at Los Angeles Metro, we are looking at Northern California. I figured I'd end with my home market. This has been a really interesting one for me to watch. And so this has been one of the hardest hit markets from a parking revenues standpoint. Take a look at what was happening here, right? We almost stayed at down 95% in Northern California all the way up through June. I've been scratching my chin about what's caused this for a long time. Team, the best thing that I can come up with is that this just reflects sort of stronger adherence to shelter in place and social distancing policies. You think about some of the large employers in Northern California tend to be a little bit more tech oriented. I know Twitter, Facebook, all of these folks were very, very quick to encourage work from home. I'm sticking it out here in San Francisco, but I feel like all of my friends have gone up to Lake Tahoe or Seattle, or thought about relocating to a more scenic, more spacious, lower cost of living environment during this time. So just been interesting to watch sort of the slower recovery in parking revenues here in Northern California, 60 plus locations in this benchmark. You'll remember, right, the average garage in North America was down 54. In Northern California, we're about 14 points behind that, on average down 68.59% in the week of October 26th. Now, team, this is something that I've been chewing on for a little while. I am by no means a doctor or a viral pathologist. I am a parking professional, and so please take the next slide with a grain of salt. But I thought, and I keep thinking to myself, is it possible that we might be able to use parking data as an economic indicator for how much activity there is? And activity, to some extent, is a barometer for whether folks are out and about. And so on this slide, I've got two charts here. The first chart on the left is our Bay Area COVID case count. This comes from the 9 counties that constitute the San Francisco Bay Area. And on the right, we've got a very interesting chart from the New York Times about the basically concentration and spread of the latest third wave. So this is basically average cases per 10,000 people in the past week as of yesterday, I believe, or maybe potentially 2 days ago when I took this screenshot, October 27th. So it's not good out there, folks. If you're listening to me and you're out there, wear a mask, protect yourself, wash your hands, stay inside. I'm wondering potentially, if you're a parking asset owner in Northern California, I know that revenues are important, but I think first and foremost, right, we're all members of society and are rooting for this global health crisis to get over sooner rather than later. I'm wondering maybe some of the lower revenues that we're seeing here in Northern California potentially contributing to, we do see a slight uptick here in case counts, but it's nothing like what we're seeing in the Midwest and the Southeast. So thought that would be interesting to share. Curious on your thoughts and feedbacks. If you've got ideas, throw them in the questions box. I'm curious, do we think that we can use parking data as a way to predict outbreaks in our COVID-19 pandemic? I wanted to end on a positive note, team. To the extent that I can deliver to you good news, I always want to do that. I'm an optimistic guy. So we're going to end here with none other than New York, the Big Apple. New York City is far and away the US's top market for off-street parking right now. Take a look at what happened here. Everybody knows, right? Feels like 36 months ago in April of 2020, New York was suffering and was the epicenter of the nation's COVID-19 crisis. It was a tragedy what the city had to go through. Things were really locked down early as the city grappled with the COVID-19 crisis. But they've had that first strong wave, maybe a little bit slower than the national average, as you might expect. But since then, COVID cases have been down. It's been relatively controlled in the Northeast since suffering from that first wave. Just take a look at revenue recovery from mid-June all the way up until now. I mean, I might even break this up into 3 phases. So we had sort of June until August, and then I think this is Labor Day. I think Jamie Dimon and the team at JP Morgan said we're going back to work, and just, I mean, take a look at this here. I mean, almost in this past week, transient revenues down 18.55%, just slightly behind the OnStreet parking operation in Miami, Florida. This is far and away the top market for off-street parking right now. again, team, I spent a lot of time thinking about these charts and trying to think about, well, what's causing these? I think I also have the privilege of talking to a lot of clients too, and getting their thoughts and feedback. Generally speaking, I think my clients are smarter than me. So here's sort of the top 3 reasons that I've got for you around why I think the New York City parking market is so strong. And I'm thinking that we might be able to use this to inform some of the 2021 strategies that I'm going to be recommending to you folks later in the presentation. So first one, we've got low cases since that awful first wave. If you're a parking professional and you want transactions to come back, then what you should be doing is wearing a mask, tell your friends to wear a mask, stay at home, shelter in place. We've got to beat this thing, right? That is going to be single-handedly the best thing that we can do in order to encourage a return to normalcy. We've got to beat this virus, and they've done a pretty good job of doing that in New York City, and you can see that result in the data. Second thing that I think is a little bit interesting is New York City, I think, is unique in terms of the transit ridership. So that shift from transit to personal vehicle use as folks shy away from transit and move towards driving, I think has benefited folks. I think the subway in New York City is sort of unique among all of the big transit systems here in the US, and just how robust it is, how many people relied on it on a daily basis. There was a lot of potential demand that would shift away. I think for myself, as someone who's concerned about climate change and someone who's concerned about the effect that single occupancy vehicles have from a congestion perspective, this makes me think that parking pricing will have an even stronger role to play in terms of looking to encourage people to use more sustainable modes. Once this crisis is under control, I think, for the time being, people need to be given options, and I believe in options. The other thing that I think was interesting to chat with you all about today, and this was something that multiple clients have told me, especially in the last couple of weeks. I'm not sure if you folks have seen the headlines but there's really been a proliferation in outdoor dining. This COVID crisis has sort of helped city agencies to rethink the way that they use some of the very, very valuable curb space that had been previously allocated to private vehicle storage or on-street parking. What my clients in New York are telling me is that basically there's pretty much nowhere there you can park on the street in New York. And so if you want to use your car to get somewhere instead of walk or take a bike, then your options are limited. And you're basically sort of forced to put your car in an off-street garage. I think that this is something that intuitively makes a lot of sense to me, and I also think holds a lot of promise for the parking industry. I think generally speaking, off-street parking environments result in a higher revenue per transaction than on-street parking environments, and so to the extent that we're shifting transactions away from on-street to off-street, that's going to be a net positive for the industry. I also think that, quite frankly, there's way too much on-street parking, and that a lot of that curb space can be repurposed into a higher and better use. And so interesting to see what the proliferation in outdoor dining might have done to off-street parking revenues in the Big Apple. And with that, team, I'm going to transition away from my slides here. It's 8:28, so I've got another, 20 minutes with you all to run through these. I thought that this would be sort of a nice transition because I'm going to be talking about repurposing some of that curb space and thinking more critically about how that land is allocated and is that really the best and highest need. And as a parking professional, I know sometimes it can tug on our heartstrings a little bit. Meters and mobile payments in an on-street environment definitely provide a lot of revenue to fund sort of critical resources, but I don't think it's a lose-lose here, team. I think that we can find a way to make this a win, and I think furthermore, I think that parking management has a very, very strong role to play in thinking critically about these land use decisions. How are we allocating this curb space and accommodating for those parkers, right? Because let's face it, not everybody can ride a bike. So down south in the beautiful city of Santa Monica, California, they're thinking critically about how can we promote economic recovery and providing our residents and visitors with safe access to outdoor amenities. One of the things that they're doing, Santa Monica is a wonderful place to ride a bike. If you've not visited, I would highly recommend it. Rent a little, I think they don't have the Breeze bike share anymore, which is unfortunate. But anyways, rent a bike. My family and I were down there last Christmas. We had a great cruise along the beach. It's just a wonderful thing to do. So they're taking what was previously some on-street metered parking right here along Ocean Avenue. You've got the Palisades Park to your right here. The beach and the ocean are right over there. It's just a really wonderful place to be. Really digging the color on this girl's bike, green and pink, super cool. So yeah, they're going to be taking some of these on-street meters here and repurposing it into a bike lane. What does this mean for the city of Santa Monica and parking management more specifically? Well, it helps Santa Monica, part of their transportation and mobility goals, right? So that's our North Star. This is what are we pursuing? They want to promote safe, healthy, and sustainable transportation options for residents and visitors. Bike lanes carry a lot of people. It's a more efficient mode than a single occupancy vehicle. Going to help bring those who are capable and willing to ride bikes into downtown Santa Monica, make it a more accessible place to be. That being said, folks, right, we know that car travel is a strong preference for many of our residents, and not everyone is able to ride a bike. I think, here in America, we believe in options, and so to the extent that we're going to be repurposing OnStreet into other uses, I think that only increases the importance of off-street parking inventory and the policies that we use to manage those spaces. So previously, right, we've been thinking about using off-street spaces primarily to accommodate long duration lengths of stay, commuters, business travelers, what have you, a little bit of a higher price product. I think thinking a little bit more critically about who do our garages cater to and how do we make that inventory more available to someone who maybe just wants to come in and enjoy some outdoor dining in Santa Monica is going to be critical as we eliminate on-street inventory and shift some of that demand into our off-street environment. Now, one of the segments of parking demand that has been the most resilient through this COVID-19 crisis are locations that are near outdoor amenities. So people are understanding the science and they know that outdoor transmission of the COVID-19 virus is near impossible, according to Bob Watcher, who's the chair of medicine at UCSF here in San Francisco. And so they want to access parks, they want to access beaches, they want to basically stay outside and recreate in a safe, healthy way. And so demand for outdoor amenities like the beach in Santa Monica, very, very strong. And so those meters along Ocean Avenue, I imagine many folks probably parked there looking to access the beach. I think it's important for us to say, well, do we have enough inventory in the beach lots? Santa Monica maintains almost 8,000 parking spaces along the beautiful stretch of Southern California coastline that constitutes the Santa Monica municipal boundaries. So you can see here, this was sort of pre-COVID. We had one very, very busy weekend in March. I think this might have been the Santa Monica Marathon or the Los Angeles Marathon, excuse me. The lots were closed, right, during this period of time. No occupancy, not seeing anyone. They started to open these things up. Take a look at just how strong some of the occupancy patterns were for the city of Santa Monica's beach parking operations stretching into the summer, right? Reaching peak occupancy here in late August and then for Labor Day weekend. But it's an interesting trend here, right? So we see these two peaks here. These are weekends, folks, right, where people are coming from all over California to access the wonderful beach amenities in Santa Monica. But on the weekdays, there are plenty of spaces. I'm talking 2,000, 3,000 spaces available for those who want them. To me, what this tells me is that there is plenty of space for folks to park and access the beach, and that those meters on Ocean Avenue can accommodate a different use, and we can start to shift some of this demand into some of these beach lots. On the weekends, it is a little concerning, right? We were sort of hitting peak occupancy here. I wonder how we're going to handle some of those that weekend demand. I will tell you though, team, if you take a look at these data points, what this tells me is that we're seeing a seasonal decline, right? So the weather in Santa Monica is nice year round, but it's less conducive to the beach and the summer travel season in October than it is in August. And so for the time being, I think the city of Santa Monica can rest easy knowing that they're going to have plenty of parking inventory for beachgoers, even on weekends. But we might think a little bit more critically about potentially how to accommodate the rush of demand that we might see in summer of 2021. They've got 13 off-street parking structures in the city of Santa Monica, lots of space to accommodate folks. It's going to be the parking policies that put folks in the right inventory for the right amount of time at the right price that is going to be most interesting to me, and I think it's going to really facilitate and make this work while promoting the city of Santa Monica's transportation goals, enabling safe, healthy, equitable access to downtown Santa Monica. So team, we're gonna mosey down south in Southern California to beautiful Long Beach, California. So here's what's going on in Long Beach. Been a big fan of these guys, one of my earliest clients. Let's face it, right? So parking revenues provide critical revenues for municipal governments. These revenues often are used to fund essential services. I'm talking fire departments, transit services, homelessness resources, you name it. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And from a COVID-19 perspective, right, it's no doubt, no surprise to anybody on this webinar today that parking revenues have had a big hit across the board, right? Down 54% for off-street assets, 36 now for on-street assets, but we also know that some assets have been doing better than others, right? Miami is doing better than Houston. Furthermore, right, we saw in the Santa Monica beach lot chart that in a lot of ways, locations near outdoor amenities like beaches and parks have been pretty strong performance. We've even seen cases where things are up year over year, 2020 versus 2019, simply because demand for the ability to recreate outdoors has never been stronger. Now, I'm a big fan. If you've talked to me before, I've probably talked to you, right? How can we use price as a way to manage demand? It has so many benefits. I think you know, we live in a world where a lot of times our decisions have trade-offs, right? We've got a win-lose situation. I'm of the view that raising prices to manage demand in high demand areas is like a win-win-win-win-win-win-win. It's very difficult to find someone who loses in this scenario, right? So if we can use price to manage demand, what we wind up doing is we wind up creating more availability for those folks who do need to drive. So it's not uncommon for lots to totally fill up. Higher prices are going to basically encourage folks to basically take sort of maybe a cheaper transit, bike, walk, and really create more availability for those folks who really do need to drive, right? We're going to encourage those more sustainable modes, lower our carbon footprint, while also providing additional revenues that we can use to either fund essential services or make those transit options more rich, more robust, more frequent. So two of the strongest locations down at the city of Long Beach. I'm taking some screenshots here from Google Earth for us. Here's the Marina Green parking lot. Look at this wonderful marina they've got, this really close to gorgeous Alamitos Beach. And then here's the Laverne and Ocean lot, close to the scenic Granada Beach. These have been two of the strongest performers in the city of Long Beach's off-street parking environment. This is taking a look at transactions year over year, team. So the darker colors on the right-hand side represent what happened, the total number of parking transactions in 2020. The lighter colored line to the left, that represents what happened in 2019, and you can see sort of that change year over year. So you can see parking transactions in Long Beach at these three locations were down in June and July, but that tune has changed in August and September. Take a look at some of these numbers, folks. In August of 2020, there were 3,597 parking transactions in that small lot in Laverne and Ocean. Last year, in August of 2019, we only had 2,352. That is an increase of 53% year over year. Pretty massive. Equally impressive, almost even more impressive, just given how the denominator at the Marina Green lot is higher. This year, 11,787 parking transactions at the Marina Green lot. Last year, in August of 2019, that number was 8,236. That's an increase of 3,551 transactions, or 43%. Team, these lots are parking a lot of cars. Now, here's what happened in Long Beach. The beach pricing was already significantly below what the market rates were. So they were charging less than comparative towns in Southern California and what some of the privately managed lots were charging in Long Beach. So they were planning on trying to get those rates up to what at least the market was charging anyways. This data was able to help really make that case and allow us to implement a strategic rate increase at these beach lots in fiscal year 2021. This strategic rate increase is going to do three things for the city. Again, I think just a big win-win-win here, right? We're going to be bringing parking prices up to what the market rate would charge, bring Long Beach to in line with what folks are charging in Venice and Santa Monica and what have you. Those higher prices are going to generate more availability in these off-street surface lots for residents and visitors who really need to drive in order to access the wonderful beach that they've got down in Long Beach. But then I think third and most importantly, right, these higher prices are going to provide a much needed revenue increase for the city to continue doing the great work that they're doing down there in Long Beach, California. And so I know that the picture is bleak out there, folks, but the reality is that the story is more nuanced than you might admit, the story is more nuanced than it is at first glance, right? There are going to be segments of parking demand that are either more resilient or even up year over year. I think critically about monitoring and measuring those, understanding who those folks are, and try to make sure that we're pricing those folks the right way. Let's face it, municipalities need money right now. We're in a crisis from a revenue perspective. This parking revenue gets used for a ton of good services that need to continue. Parking has a strong role to play in generating those revenues for the city so that they can continue to do the good work that they do. We are going to hop 3,000 miles from the west coast of the United States over to the east coast, great state of North Carolina, and the wonderful city of Asheville. Here I've got two pictures for you. The Wall Street parking garage, a gorgeous structure in of itself. I felt compelled to include a photo of the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm an avid outdoorsman. One of my first backpacking trips was through the Great Smoky Mountains. We made a pit stop in Asheville. Who knows, maybe we even parked at the Wall Street parking garage and picked up some gear at REI. I had my first encounter with a black bear in the Great Smoky Mountains. It was a fun experience. Anyways, the city of Asheville maintains 4 off-street parking garages for the public in the city. Prior to COVID, these garages were totally slammed, and there was a long wait list for monthly parking at these municipal garages. Prices were kept low as an amenity to residents and folks that needed to visit the structure relative to what the market would bear. As Asheville opened back up, it sought to leverage granular occupancy data to understand when and where it could add monthly parkers off of the wait list. What this would do is expand access to downtown for residents and increase revenues. Asheville is also considering raising residential parking permit prices. So team, this is another one of my best ideas for municipal parking management. So I took a look at the data. U.S. new car sales were up 7% year over year in September. That's September 2020 versus September 2019. So people are buying cars. This means that there are more vehicles on the road or in parking spaces, but the data tells us that they're definitely not in these downtown cores. Intuitively, what this leads me to believe is that residential parking demand is increasing. You guys already know how big of a fan I am around using price to manage that demand. Given the big fiscal crunch that many cities are facing, I think thinking about implementing some sort of market-based pricing program for residential on-street permit prices is a no-brainer. Here in the city of San Francisco, I think it would cost you $144 for a annual residential parking pass. If you want to buy a pass for the Muni, I think it's something like $90 a month. So something like 10x more expensive to take the sustainable transportation option relative to storing your vehicle on the street there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for municipal parking managers to think critically about residential on-street permit prices, one of the most underpriced parking products that we've got. So in Asheville, we're going to take a look at the wonderful Wall Street garage. Not quite as beautiful as the Smoky Mountains. Gosh, just look at that. Gorgeous. But you can see here the Wall Street garage is a very, very popular facility, routinely reaching capacity in our pre-COVID environment. And then the garage shuts down here from the middle of March all the way to August. Really interesting to see how quickly the garage was able to get back to peak capacity. I mean, take a look, team, right? We're hitting a peak here, we're hitting a peak here. So interesting, you think, you know, a lot of times if you see the structure is full, right? That's that, no more parkers, it's full. But the reality is, team, is that it's a vastly different story on weekends relative to weekdays. And so we're going to dive into that in a minute. What this chart shows us, team, is the average daily occupancy at the Wall Street garage on weekends in the month of September 20. That darker colored line with the closed circle, that represents 2020. The lighter colored line with the open circle, that represents September of 2019. Interestingly enough here, I always think that this is fascinating. So obviously we see higher peak occupancies on weekends in September 20 relative to weekends in September 2019. Peak at 2 p.m. of 163 versus last year 121. Now, I think more interesting perhaps than the increase is the way that the shape of the curve has changed. A lot of times what we'll see is these curves will change in tandem, so to speak. So things will rise and fall, right? If this is going to go up, it's going to be uniform. Here we actually see less early morning occupancy and less evening occupancy, more folks basically coming in the middle of the day. This is getting more and more common basically as parking behavior changes around these new commute patterns. So we're seeing an increase in mid-afternoon visitors, sun is out and shining, maybe there's a farmer's market, who knows what's going on in Asheville, gorgeous little town. But yeah, things are really filling up at that moment in time. But you can see here, monthly parkers hardly use the facility at all. On average, there are 4 monthly parkers in the facility on weekends. Weekdays is a different story. Things and occupancy are down, largely attributable to fewer transient parkers, but you can also see that contract parkers in the Wall Street garage are down 32%, right? Last year we had 19 parkers in the structure. This year we had 13. So the city of Asheville knows that monthly parkers visit the city on, the Wall Street garage on weekdays and not weekends. It knows that its peak days are all weekends and not weekdays, and therefore the city can feel good about combing through the monthly parking wait list, looking to add monthly parkers to the facility and not worry about overcrowding the garage on weekends. This accomplishes the dual objective of providing more access to downtowns while raising critical revenues that the city can use to fund all of the wonderful things that the folks at the city of Asheville are doing. How am I doing on time, team? Looking at my phone here, 8:48, so we've got 12 more minutes. I'm gonna wrap things up and then open things up to Q&A. Here are my 4 summary and recommendation points for on-street and off-street parking management in 2021. So just a quick scratch in my chin, making a prognostication. As the US economy slowly ramps back up, current data tells me that we'd expect parking demand to increase steadily and slowly like we have seen from maybe the phase 2 of the recovery, that's mid-June of 2020 to now, likely returning to 2019 levels sometime in the second quarter of 2020. Now, that's a blanket statement, team, but what the data has shown us is that the story varies significantly by region, right? And the story varies significantly by asset type. So there's going to be some significant variability in when folks get back to normal. Some locations, like in Long Beach beach lots, normal's already back, right? And they're busier than they've ever been. So Certain things we do expect. On-street parking will recover faster than off-street parking. I think for those of you who think about on-street parking prices, that's a really important point to consider. We also expect that retail and residential parking will outperform office assets. We see garages near Targets and grocery stores basically doing very, very well. Obviously, with everybody working from home, those garages that have a little bit more of an office focus are going to be a bit more sleepy. Obviously, what the future of work looks like, I don't know. I don't get paid to think critically about that, but that's my bet for the time being, at least for the next 6 months. Here's the second thing that I can tell you. I feel pretty good about this. Different types of parking demand will recover at different paces, and I strongly recommend all of you to be digging through your data to understand which one of your demand segments are coming back the strongest, and look to use price to manage that demand. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you have influence over how you price residential parking permits, please think about raising those prices. You're doing not only a service for the city, but I think a service for U.S. parking management more broadly. We need to spend more time thinking critically about how we price residential parking permits. Third point, let's get creative with monthly parking, right? So the world of commuters coming in Monday through Friday, spending 9 hours in the garage, I'm not sure we're ever going to get back to that, right? So please consider flexible parking programs that are going to cater to your new commute patterns. You can measure what those new commute patterns look like by digging into the data that you've already got right now in your park systems and in your meters. I'd look to understand the temporal differences in parking demand in order to maximize occupancy efficiency. So what this means is just like what the folks in Asheville are doing in North Carolina, right? We know that monthly parkers leverage the facility on weekdays, the transient parkers come on the weekends. There's no need that we can't accommodate more parkers if they tend to use the garages at different times. That's what I mean by the temporal difference in parking demand. Last but not least, team, consider repurposing on-street parking inventory into higher and better uses. Bike lanes, parklets so that the restaurants can open back up, shared spaces. There's lots of different interesting things going on right now. I know as parking professionals, I don't know, it might be a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Those were spaces that were previously generating revenues for us. I don't think that we need to think about this as a losing situation. I think that we need to understand that there is always going to be a role for the car and how people move and get around our cities. And as parking professionals, it is our job to think critically about how we can accommodate them. I am of the view that we should be looking to accommodate these parkers in some of our off-street parking structures. Almost always we see a higher revenue per transaction in an off-street structure relative to an on-street environment. This is a winning trade. If we can park cars off-street versus on-street, not only do parking revenues go up, but we can basically use that curb space for some other use. Minimize the ingress egress points where people pulling in and out. This is going to make it a safer environment for cyclists and pedestrians. I'm a big fan of thinking critically about how we're allocating our on-street parking inventory and looking to see if we can't accommodate these parkers elsewhere. Folks, that's all I've got for you. I'm going to go ahead and open up the question panel here and see if I can answer some good stuff. So Melanie Curry says we've got stricter COVID precautions in Houston, potentially leading to off-street, the lower recovery rates. Seems prudent to me. I've got a sister down in Houston, Texas. She's a sophomore at Rice University. So Melanie, if you're in Houston, I appreciate those strict precautions. Let's see, what else? Mark Queely asks me if I expect 2019 levels in 2020 of Q2 or 2021. Mark, I think you might have caught me on a gaffe there. Obviously, we can't go back to 2020 to Q2. That's in the past. I'm not sure I would want to do that anyways. That was a tough quarter for me personally. Yeah, so I'd expect demand to come back in 2021. So to anyone still listening, I do apologize if I messed that up. Melanie Curry says, definitely need to raise residential permit parking prices. Difficult to manage the political blowback. Melanie, I could not agree with you more. In my viewpoint, municipal parking managers are saints. They have an incredibly difficult job of doing the very unpopular political things that need to get done. If I had a silver bullet for you around how to manage some of that political blowback, I would paste it all over these slides in size 32 font. I think, politics in each city are different. You've got to understand what the levers are, what the transportation goals are, and just make a case. And, we know it's the right thing to do in our hearts. And so I think we've got to find a way to make it happen. Suzanne Rinfrey in, I think, Somerville, Massachusetts. Thanks so much for joining, Suzanne. Repurposing for bike lanes. What about deliveries to businesses? Do I have any idea sharing the bike lane with LZ? I'm not sure what LZ are, but yeah, so deliveries are really interesting, right? So it's sort of just it's necessary, right? If we're not putting restocking the shelves of grocery stores or bringing ingredients into the local pizza shop, then we're not going to have the robust and lively downtowns that we know and love about America. I think one of the interesting things that they've done in the city of Aspen is look to leverage some of the alley infrastructure that they have in order to basically put the deliveries in alleys as opposed to on the street. I know another thing that they're doing here in San Francisco is basically trying to restrict the delivery times to times that aren't popular to basically use those bike lanes. So in the morning and the evenings, I think that there's a strong need to basically think about that, temporal complementary demand patterns, right? I don't think anybody's riding their bike at 4 in the morning. Can we get the deliveries done then? That's my best idea right now, Suzanne, but it's a really good question, and I think hopefully someone smarter than me can tackle it. Mr. Servine down in the city of Santa Monica, you are very kind. I love working with you and your team. You've just done a fantastic job. I do think you are correct. Yeah, data is key. Basically, making information and data transparent to all of the folks involved in the municipal parking decision-making process. There's so many, right? So not only do we have staff, we've got our city manager, we've got the city council, we've got the mayor, we've got downtown business associations. I think this is something that makes municipal parking management so difficult, is just the number of interested stakeholders that are involved in the process. What I like to say is that if you're not using data to manage your parking operation, you're effectively going to be shouting at one another in the dark. And I don't know how anyone could expect to reach anything remotely, how you could meet consensus, and how that consensus could potentially even be the right thing unless everybody is first on the same page. And so one of the things that I've been most proud of in our work down in Santa Monica and in other municipalities is just who they give access to this Smarking tool. So it's not only just Henry and his staff in Santa Monica, but it's the planning commission, it's the mayor, city manager, all different types of folks, the downtown business association. Let's get folks on the same page. Step one of making an educated decision around parking management and what is best. Megan Gardo asks, you may have covered this previously, but does the data show and include any municipalities that temporarily suspended parking fees, and how have they reinstituted those fees? Megan, that's a really wonderful question. So a lot of our clients basically stopped charging for parking, and it broke my heart when they did that. I don't think that they had my feelings in mind when they did, but my heart was broken nonetheless. Anyways, it was a tough battle. This was something that my team was really focused on through April, May, and June, thinking about how can we help these clients turn paid parking back on, because any revenue is better than no revenue. Plus, we know that paid parking plays a critical role in basically managing the transportation infrastructure in a city. So what we did is basically built revenue reforecast models, right? Basically saying, look, if you don't turn things back on, if we were able to turn things back on and the revenue would look like other cities that kept charging, here's the amount of revenue that we'd be making. It was not trivial to basically show your city leaders and other interested parties what turning paid parking back on might do for a municipal budget. Those sorts of revenue reforecast models have been critical in terms of turning things back on. One little anecdote that I'll share, in the city of Santa Rosa, they basically have a policy where they basically use price to manage demand. And so Kim Nadeau needed to make a case that basically demand was back, but how do we do that if we don't have the meters on and we're primarily using payment data in order to calculate a calibrated occupancy? Well, she was able to use her LPR to basically go around and scan cars during peak times in order to understand what occupancies were, make the case to downtown businesses and other interested stakeholders that paid parking needed to resume. I thought that was a very innovative approach. Team, it is 9 o'clock here in San Francisco. The sun is up and over the sky. I want to thank you all for joining me today. It was a pleasure talking with you. Those charts that I walked through at the start, that's Smarking's industry benchmark tool. You heard me talk about those. If you're interested in getting access to that, please get in touch with my wonderful colleague, Sarah. Her email, sarah@smarking.com. We'd love to talk with you about how we could include your data in the benchmark and give you access to the robust tool that is the Smarking industry benchmark. To the extent that you've just got a question, you want to talk to me, go ahead, shoot us an email, contact@smarking.com. We love to hear from parking professionals. Thank you so much for joining us, team. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. It's a beautiful Thursday here in the Bay. Starting to think about the weekend. Should be a good one. Take care, folks. Hope to hear from you all soon. Adios.